know you all have been dripping with anticipation. Well, here it is, part 2 of the N50 re-grease tutorial. Now, where we left off in the last video, we had just got the machine degreased, started putting it back together, and we were getting ready for grease. Well, guess what? It is time. Let's get started. All right, as you can see here, we got a big old wad of grease. We're just gonna start schlepping this stuff down into there. Like I said, we wanna make sure that we get all the way down into there. You see those gears down there? We wanna make sure that we get all of that coated nice and heavily. Now, I did go ahead and remove that cluster gear just so you can see how much grease is down there. So you see in the corners of right here on this gear, right? When I start to turn this planetary right here, that's a good way to start to get that grease to engage. But you see how it's causing the grease to move with it. That means that that grease is being incorporated back into the gear track. That means that it's not going to allow the grease to flick off and run dry. It means that you have enough grease packed into here to make sure that this thing stays lubricated. All right, now that you saw the lubrication of the undergears, we're gonna go ahead and keep lubricating this gear cluster here. So we're gonna go ahead and really, it's gonna take quite a bit of grease, guys, so you can use some pretty large globs here. We just really wanna fill in all of these open spaces. Now, once you feel like you got a pretty healthy coating on these gears here, we're gonna go ahead and grab the planetary down here, guys. We're gonna take this and we're gonna turn it, and that's gonna just engage all of those gears. That's gonna distribute a lot of that grease around to make sure that everything is getting coated properly. Some of that grease is gonna get sucked further down, so you can go ahead and add a little bit more if you so feel inclined. The moral of the story here is we don't want these gear teeth to be exposed. We don't want metal on metal. We want a layer of grease. We want the lubrication to, limit the amount of friction and limit the amount of gear wear. So just make sure you get a nice heavy coating of grease in here, and we can go ahead and spin that a little more just to make sure that that all distributes properly. All right, once we have this thing all greased up, we're gonna go ahead and drop in our last gear right here. Remember, this one just pushes down into place, and we're gonna go ahead and we are going to lubricate this gear as well. So we wanna put a lot of grease on there. Okay, we have it all greased up here. We want to make special care. We want to note that we clean this grease off of this shaft right here. And there is a reason behind that. We're going to do it on this shaft as well. We really don't want any grease on the actual shaft, at least not a large amount. You can have a very, very thin layer for lubrication only. But if you have too much, when you try to go ahead and install it back into the back of this machine here, it's going to have to push that grease out of this sleeve. When you're putting it into there, it's going to act kind of like hydraulics, right? It's going to have some hydraulic pressure pushing against it. So make sure that your shaft is clean. Here's a little bit better look at that. You can tell that this shaft right here, it does have a little bit of lubrication on it, but not enough that it's going to cause us problems. Same with this one right here. Again, just a very light layer of lubrication. So now that we have the transmission plumb full of grease there, we're going to come over here and we're going to work on the rear end of the motor housing here, I guess the front end here. This transmission here mounts up to this face right here. We want to make sure to add quite a bit of grease just along this faceplate, also on this center gear as well. All right, take a look. I'm going to start on this center gear right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and just get a little mountain of grease on there. We want to make sure that this gear stays nice and lubricated. Then we can move into the face of the machine here, and we're just going to coat this face. Now again, we do want to pay attention and make sure that we're not getting any grease inside of these sleeves right here, because again, that'll cause a little bit of back pressure. It'll make it harder to install the transmission housing when it comes time for that. Now you might be wondering why we're putting a lot of grease here on this plate when there's really only that single gear in the middle. There is a reasoning behind that. So the grease back here on this plate is actually a line of defense. So you see we have the transmission casing here. We have a bunch of grease in there. That grease is going to distribute. It's going to get flicked off of those gears as they run. Well, if there's not a barrier of grease along this wall, some of that grease will get plastered onto here. It'll get lost from the actual gears. So if we fill in the void here, the grease can't go anywhere. It can't go from the transmission to the back of this housing because there's already a layer there. So it keeps your grease engaged in the action here. So now that we have everything greased up here, it is going to be time to reinstall the transmission back to the motor housing there. We want to make sure that this little lever right here, the speed lever changer, we want to make sure that that is in speed 2 or in the middle position on that saddle. It's going to make it easier to install the speed lever. All right, so as you can see, we have our transmission here. We're gonna go ahead and mount it back to the base here. Just make sure you get your pins here, your shafts nice and aligned. You really have two alignments here. So you have this guy, the larger one up top, the smaller one down here. And we're just gonna line those up and we're gonna press these two housings together. And you're gonna have to just wiggle it a little bit, but you will feel everything just kind of start to slide into place. You're gonna notice that there's a lot less of a gap right here where there's two things mount together. Now we gotta get into the back there. We're gonna hold this in place, but we wanna get in there now and tighten one of those screws to mount these two housings together. Now, as you can tell here, I do have the housings together. This gap is non-existent now. It's nice and tight. I am holding with my hand, I'm holding on to the other side. There's this little square kind of jut out right here. I'm holding that to keep these two housings together. Now we just need to get up into the machine. Those big body screws that we took out at the beginning, we have to get in there and we need to tighten at least one of those into place. So I have one in place here. We're gonna give this a few tightens. Almost there. I feel it starting to seat up. And we are tight. There we go. I can go ahead and release that now. Now, remember, we have 8 of those to tighten. So let's go around this body here and let's tighten all of those bolts into place. Now, just for your reference, just to make sure you remember, it's these ones way up in there that we're referring to. And like I said, there are several of those around the machine casing here. So let's go ahead and tighten all those into place. All right, so we have just finished up tightening all of these mounting bolts around the head here to mount the transmission to the motor casing. Now we need to go ahead and reinstall this switch plate here. All right, again, as we discussed, it's probably in your best interest to have this shift into the second gear there, right? You see the little shifting post, it's right there in the center of that bracket. And we're gonna go ahead, put our actual speed lever into second gear here. You see how our little saddle here is facing down. Pay special close attention when we get this switch into place here. Again, this is an insulator sleeve, so we just wanna make sure that that is actually protecting the switch. And we'll just work to push this into place, get everything nice and lined up here. Eventually you will feel that seat into place. All right, as you can see, we're putting a little bit of pressure on here. We got this plate nice and lined up. Everything seems to be in place here. Now we just need to go ahead and install some of our screws here to lock this plate into place. Now, I already have one of these installed here. Take a look. This is what we're looking at. There should be 6 similar little screws. Now, there are a couple left down here, guys. These are for mounting that back cap on. You can tell they're a little bit bigger. They're a little bit different. So you want to make sure that you find 6 of the like ones that are just like a little bit smaller, like so. All right, so we have this thing put back together. You see this plate is nice and mounted. It's nice and flush. We're gonna go ahead and shift the knob here. Let's see if we shift. Oh yeah, it's shifting really nice. You wanna make sure that you do a few shifts here just to make sure that all of your gears are aligned properly. Make sure that your shifter and everything is in place before we move on further in the process. All right, now that we have tested our gears, it's time to go ahead and put this back plate on here. Now, just a few things that we want to do. We want to make sure that these 2 wires right here, right, your power wires, we want to thread those through these large openings here so that we have access to those. They're not getting pinched. And we're also going to want to do the same with these 2 wire clips here. We're going to go ahead and thread those through this large opening as well. Now the goal here is when we go to slide this into place, remember we want our connectors, our little speed tabs that these wires plug into on the same side as the wires. We want this little hole here on the top orientation, and you really just want to make sure that we're not pinching any of these wires as we slide this into place. It's going to mount over these threaded little rods right here. We got a few nuts to put into place, so let's just go ahead and seat that down and then go ahead and get ready to install those nuts. All right, so we have our nuts here. We should have 4 of these guys. We want to go ahead and start to thread them onto these little posts right here. Now remember, when you're working with any sort of nut, you always want to get it started by hand first, because if you don't, it's a lot higher chance that you're going to strip it out. So we got that started. Now I don't know that we mentioned this at the beginning, but the driver that we want for this is actually going to be an 11/32. So let's go ahead, we're going to tighten that baby down into place. Okay, nice and tight. We did start one on the other side. We'll get this one going. And then we'd also have one on the top and on the bottom as well. Okay, it is now time to install our little clips right here onto our speed board back here. Remember, at the start of the video, this is probably part 2 here, at the start of the video we did color 1, right? So that way we know it's going to go on the top clip. We literally just going to slide that into place. It's just going to press right on like so. And we'll put the second one down here on the bottom, just like that. All right, now that we have this bracket mounted into place, you know, we've ensured that these nuts are all tight and everything is lined up. We got our clips in place. Now it's time to actually get ready to install the back cap here, the back cover. Now notice, remember on the new style one that we're finishing up here, it has a strain relief on the actual cap versus on the base. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and grab our ground wire here. There's gonna be one tiny little screw, that's your ground screw. We're going to go ahead and put that into place, and we're going to screw that into the mounting spot for the ground wire, which is right here. And once we get that installed, that's going to hold this back cap, so we're not going to have to hold it. We can splice these wires together. All right, there we go. That is nice and tight. And like the kid who got all F's on the report card, we are grounded. So as previously stated, now we need to splice these wires together, right? So since that ground cord is in place, we can go ahead, look, Mom, no hands. We're gonna leave that there. Now we want to mount up like wires with like wires. So we're gonna splice these two together, white with white, black with black. So we'll go ahead, we'll twist these into place. We'll go ahead and grab our wire nuts here, and we're gonna go ahead and twist those on here. There we go. Now with wire nuts here, I always like to grab them, give them just a little pull here to make sure that they're tight and they're not just gonna fall right off. These are in fact tight, and we're gonna move on to the black wire. And we're gonna do the same thing with the black wire. Give it a little tug here, make sure that's nice and tight, and we are. We are now ready to actually just reinstall this back cover. So to put this back cap on, all we're gonna do is slide it up into place. Make sure we get a nice fit here, right? You want this butted up against each other. You don't really want a gap there. And then we'll just align this and make sure that we can see our threads so that we can put our bolts into place. All right, as you can tell, we got the back cap mounted on here. We have our screws in place. It's time for the maiden voyage. Now, if you remember, this one does have a breaker down here, right? And this was popping, remember? So let's go ahead and test it. Let's see if adjusting this switch fixed that issue. It might not. Let's go ahead and try it out. You gotta plug it in first. All right, we do in fact have it plugged in. Now let's go ahead, let's see what happens. Okay, that's gonna pop. All right, so since that breaker popped, that is telling us a couple things here. So this motor, it does run fine when it actually runs. It is shorting out somewhere. I believe the short is in this switch, so we're probably gonna have to replace this switch. We'll also take a look down here at the breaker down here. That's gonna be in another video. I'll link that at the end of this video. We're gonna get that uploaded hopefully pretty soon. You can take a look at that. Now I would try and sneak that into this video. The only problem is it will take a little bit to disassemble and show that. Also at the same time, I don't have these parts, so I'm gonna have to put these on order. We'll be back with you pretty soon. I was, however, able to get the older one put back together here. Let's take a listen. Oh, you can tell it is just purring like a kitten. Let's check out that second speed. Sounds fantastic. And let's go for speed 3 here. So you can hear that it's still running a little rough. So as expected from the beginning of that video, these first and second gears, they sound fantastic now. Just a simple regrease was able to take care of those. The reason it's kind of sounding a little rough in that third speed there, it's just moving so fast around this internal ring gear that you're just getting some metal on metal sound. So we actually need to grease this too. So we're gonna pull this planetary off real quick and see if we can't just make it perfect. Now to get this planetary taken off, we have to remove this drip ring right here. Now sometimes they'll just kind of come off by hand. This one is a little stubborn. Sometimes you'll be able to catch the very edge of that lip with a flathead screwdriver. This one though it is kind of being stubborn. Now there is a little tiny indention on these plates. You'll see just a little tiny indention right there. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. There we go, take a look at that, just a little tiny indention. What we can do, we don't want to be rough with it because we don't want to damage it, but if we just take a punch and get right on the edge of that lip and I'm talking just very lightly tap that with a mallet. Now, as stated, we want to just be very careful here, just very light taps. There we go. You see, we got some separation right here. Now we can go ahead and get a flathead screwdriver, put it right on that lip, and just give it a few more little tiny taps. And eventually, that's going to be ready to pull away from the machine. Take a look at all the crud that's hiding in there. We're going to go ahead and clean that out. Now, before we can pull off this planetary, there is a pin right here. So it's a 1/8 punch. We're going to go ahead and punch this pin out. Then we should be able to pull this planetary away. All right, so we got a hammer. We got our punch here. We're going to go ahead and knock out this pin. There we go. It's starting to come now. All right, as you can see here, we do have that pin out. This planetary is now ready to just pull down away from the machine. Now, as you can see here, this is the planetary. So this is the gear here. Let's go ahead, let's spin that around. I'm not seeing any wear on that, but you do want to inspect these for any damage or any shavings. You'll just see these teeth be kind of ground down if they're bad. Then we can go ahead, we can take a look up into this internal ring gear here. Pretty dirty. We're going to clean that up, but as expected, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of grease up here. What's left is just some old remnants. That's why you're getting a lot of that high, like, it's a lot of metal on metal there, so let's go ahead and lubricate that. But first, I'm going to get in here and just clean up a bunch of this cheese. I mean, look at all that grossness. Take a look at that. We got that substantially cleaner. Look at all the gunk that came out of there. Delicious. All right, so we're just going to take some grease and we're really just going to give a nice coating on all of these teeth around this internal ring gear here. It's really going to help dampen some of that metal on metal sound. We're also going to want to go ahead and add a little bit of grease around this gear right here. This is a pinion gear. The goal is just to make sure that we get all of these teeth filled in here. There we go. Take a look at that. We just got a light layer of grease, all the teeth filled in around that internal ring gear. Let's go ahead and put this planetary back on. Now this is just going to be a matter of doing everything that we just did in reverse. We're just going to take this planetary and we're just going to slide her up into place here. You might have to give it a little bit of love. If you need to, you can come from the bottom with a rubber mallet, and we'll go ahead and just give this baby a few taps upwards here. All right, we almost have it up into place. Let's just go ahead and put a little bit more pressure there. There we go. We are now right in place. Now we need to go ahead and align our pinhole and put our pin back into place. Now, if you take a look right there, you can see daylight. Those pinholes are lined up. Let's go ahead and get our pin, and we're just going to start it by pushing it into place by hand. All right, as you can see here, we got our pin started. Now we're going to go ahead and take a punch and punch that baby back into place. We are almost done here. Now we just need to go ahead and get our drip ring back into place. So we're just going to slide that up and over. You should be able to do this by hand. There we go. All right, moment of truth. Let's go ahead and take a listen. Okay. So it is still kind of loud, but that has nothing to do with the actual gears themselves. That's just pretty normal for these machines when they're running on that high speed. It dampened that a little bit, but unfortunately it's rotating at such a high speed. There's such large gears. There's really no sound dampening right here, so it's just gonna be a little bit loud. But boy, oh boy, do those first couple gears purr. Now, upon finishing this one up here, that is going to conclude this episode here. We got the two N50s. We got them kind of up to speed. You saw the newer one. It does need some parts. The old gal, she is running fantastic. Now, as discussed, this new one here, it is going to need a few parts, so we're not going to be able to finish that in this video. The old one, like I said, all serviced up. This guy is ready to go. We do need to do a little bit of cleaning on it, but you've witnessed the whole re-greasing portion of the Hobart N50. Now, as we can see, this cord here is still bad. We did not get around to changing that. That is going to be in a video. We will link that at the end of this video when we get it finished, as well as the repairs to finish up this newer machine. As always, thanks for sticking around. I really hope this video helped you get through a re-grease on your N50. If you don't feel comfortable with this service, we do accept shipments, so you can send these in to us. We can take care of them for you. as well as any model of KitchenAid. If you have a KitchenAid mixer, we take care of those as well. Now you can find any of the tools, parts, or grease for these machines on our website, mrmixer.store. If we don't carry a whole lot of parts for these N50s, if you do need some parts for those, we can obtain them for you. If this video has helped you out in any manner, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see how we replace this power cord, make sure to stay tuned for that, as well as the updates on this newer machine over here. We'll catch you next time.